Hello there! The following presentation is based on the story 55 Miles to the Gas Pump by Annie Proulx. This presentation is by Bernice Amaya, Ruth Moctezuma, Daisy Sepulveda, Vanessa Sepulveda, Victoria Tran, and Sabrina Wakefield. Enjoy!
Set in an area deep into the countryside, author Annie Proulx illustrates a very cryptic story, combining two separate viewpoints of a married couple who lived 55 miles from the nearest gas pump. Rancher Croom, a lethargic husband who can't seem to get his hands off of his homemade beer, heads to a canyon and drunkenly falls off a cliff. Meanwhile, back at the house, his curious wife, Mrs. Croom, creeps around the attic where her husband previously forbid her to enter. Eventually, she stumbles upon Mr. Croom's stash of dead bodies, unveiling her husband's horrific pleasure, murdering innocent women. Proulx writes a story that is less than 300 words, not even a measly page long, and yet she still manages to create a morbid tale with dark, twisted components.
Psychoanalytic criticism can be considered an interpretive process in literature. Pertaining to this process, the central idea of psychoanalytic criticism is to perform psychoanalysis on different literary aspects, such as characters and authors. Psychoanalytic criticism adopts the psychological theories of Sigmund Freud, also known as the founder of psychoanalysis. Based upon his findings, Freud constructed the idea that the unconscious mind influences an individual's behavior and thoughts. Such influences include urges such as desires, fears, needs, and internal conflicts, all of which derive from childhood experiences, as Freud claims. To keep problematic feelings within the unconscious, Freud asserted that we obtain defense mechanisms. Viewing characters as case studies, psychoanalytic critics correlate characters' actions with Freudian concepts. For instance, the famous Freudian concept of the id, ego, and superego is prevalent in the Annie Proulx short story 55 Miles to the Gas Pump. Overall, indications of various symbols and settings can be examined when applying psychoanalytic criticism.
Sigmund Freud believed that our unconscious could best be described by an iceberg. The very top of the iceberg is our conscious. In other words, what we are aware of, while the majority of the iceberg is what we can't see, or our unconscious. Freud boiled it down to three concepts he named the id, ego, and superego. The id is the pleasure factor that seeks immediate gratification towards innate aggressive and sexual instincts. The ego is a reality principle that takes into account possible social consequences and reacts according to them. It is the one that balances out both the id and the superego. The superego is a moral principle that controls the id's impulses and also adds a moral input to the ego's realistic one. It is developed through parental influence and social interaction, and it always strives to do the right thing and be society's view of perfection.
Psychoanalytic concepts. Sigmund Freud believes that nothing a person feels is ever simple. Psychoanalytic criticism argues that literary texts and even dreams may express unknown desires and anxieties of the author. An author may psychoanalyze a specific character within their literary work and carry on such criticism throughout their work. Attempts like those validate the importance of literature. Psychoanalysis seeks declaration of unanswered emotions and psychological conflicts. Freud's terms on ID, ego, and superego. Freud continues to show that our desires and our unconscious conflicts give rise to three areas of the mind for dominance as we grow from infancy to childhood and adulthood. Freud incorporates the ID as part of the personality structure that is a human's basic need, including sex, hunger, and aggressiveness. It is also used to avoid displeasure and also to gain pleasure. The ego is a component of personality and is culpable for dealing with reality that interferes with the ID and superego. The ego's concern is creating a realistic strategy to obtain pleasure. The superego is the moral portion of the personality that includes the values, social rules, and morals of society. The main purpose of the superego is to control the ID's impulses such as social prohibitions, sex, and aggression.
The id is seen with Rancher Croom since his aggression has led him to kill women in order to satisfy his desires. He lacks a moral compass, superego, or a rational input, ego, to guide his actions. The immediate gratification he seeks to satiate his thirst to kill was what literally pushed him over the edge. Mrs. Croom, on the other hand, also expressed an unconscious desire to discover what was beyond the locked attic. She had always been restricted from entering, but this only fueled her curiosity even more. She consciously knew that she was not supposed to, but in this case the only person stopping her from opening the attic door was her husband, who was not present. So she no longer had any restraints, therefore she acted. Consciously, she's checking out the attic, just to be a nosy wife, essentially. But unconsciously, she's fulfilling a desire that's been boxed in the back of her conscious, and that is freedom. The freedom to do whatever she wants without her husband putting his foot down.
Along with the idea of psychoanalysis, Freud and his daughter Annie Proulx studied the different types of defense mechanisms. A defense mechanism helps the ego to protect itself from being consciously aware of unwanted thoughts or feelings. Freud believed that we are anxious about our unacceptable wishes and impulses, and we repress this anxiety with the help of the mechanisms regression, projection, denial, displacement, sublimation, and rationalization. We can discuss each and every one of the defense mechanisms, but the main mechanisms conveyed in 55 Miles to the Gas Pump are repression, displacement, and denial. Repression is motivated forgetting that occurs unconsciously. With repression, all memory of an event or experience is blocked from conscious awareness. Freud believed that psychologically threatening feelings and traumatic events, especially ones that occur during childhood, become repressed. In the story 55 Miles to the Gas Pump, Rancher Kroom is attempting to repress his dark murdering spree past as he locks up the evidence, aka the dead bodies, in his attic, in which his wife discovers later on. The repressed memories continue to unconsciously influence the person's behavior and personality, often in maladaptive or unhealthy ways. This can be seen through Rancher Kroom's drinking problem as he continues to drink to rid his memories, which is evidently an unhealthy choice. Additionally, it can be argued that Rancher Kroom's childhood past may have some traumatic memories that may have caused him to kill all of those innocent girls. Speaking of killing, another defense mechanism illustrated in the story is displacement. Displacement is placing sexual or aggressive impulses toward a more acceptable or less threatening object or person. For instance, Rancher Kroom takes his deep, aggressive emotions and impulses out onto innocent women, leaving them covered with tarry handprints, the marks of boot heels, some bright blue with remnants of paint used on the shutters years ago, and tossing their dead bodies into his attic. Lastly, Annie Proulx showcases the defense mechanism of denial, in which an individual refuses to believe or perceive painful realities. Denial involves blocking external events from awareness. If some situation is just too much to handle, the person just refuses to experience it. Rancher Kroom is clearly trying to avoid his past of murders as he drinks away reality and heads off to a canyon brink. Ultimately, Mr. Kroom is denying his past and refuses to face reality.
Psychologist Carl Jung discovered that archetypes are symbols within a piece of literature that are very typical examples of that certain person or thing. Jung's ideas are linked to the study of psychoanalysis, as he was Neo-Freudian, which means his ideas were similar to and influenced by Sigmund. There are several types of archetypes expressed in the plot of 55 Miles to the Gas Pump, and even in the title. At first glance, the title, 55 Miles to the Gas Pump, immediately showcases that the story takes place a long ways away from any form of life, which is why it takes place in the countryside. Typically, rural areas associate with the idea of isolation and remoteness, thus setting the story in an eerie environment. Other archetypes are expressed through the characters themselves. Take Rancher Kroom, for instance.
He is described as boots and filthy hat, that wall-eyed cattleman, stray hairs like the curling fiddle string ends. Just from the description, many would consider him a dirty old man. The crooked description of Rancher's appearance brought no surprise when Annie described the fluids he intakes. Rack of bottles of his own strange beer, yeasty, cloudy, bursting out in garlands of foam. The bottles and dirtiness of Rancher symbolizes a typical example of a drunk who has many issues. It brought no surprise when Rancher Kroom was actually a mass murderer, as Annie Proulx demonstrates the specific archetype, the shadow, in her story. The shadow ultimately represents a dark side that no one wants to believe we have within us. In this case, Rancher Kroom really didn't want anyone to see this side of him. Additionally, the author conveys Mrs. Kroom as the seeker archetype in the story, leaving her to discover and explore the unknown. Ultimately, the seeker is an ambitious individual who will not stop at any cost to seek their goal.
Psychological being of Annie Proulx, known for her offbeat comic albeit dark tales and sense of place. Proulx uses the story to make fun of the uncivilized country life and takes her subject, the disillusion of North American rural life, farmers, laborers, and ranchers whose livelihood is destroyed both by changes in society and their purblind stubbornness. As a child, she had many nightmares and an imagination that sparked her interest to write about sad, dark tales. Though she is very private, she is outspoken and not afraid to write what she thinks and feels into her writing.
Sigmund Freud's School of Analysis focuses on the core idea that everyone has unconscious thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories. Additionally, the way that people behave is significantly influenced by their unconscious drives, as seen through the characters in Annie Proulx's story, 55 Miles to the Gas Pump, a morbid story in less than 300 words. Overall, we all have unacceptable thoughts and feelings. Just be careful on how you express yourself, or else you just might end up like Rancher Kroom, drunk and fallen off a cliff.